Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyen Books live streaming event series and audio and video podcast. I'm your host, Ross Makichi, and we are very excited today to have Toko-pa Turner as our special guest. Banyen Books would like to acknowledge that although the physical location of our store is on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, we also have people joining us from all over the world, so welcome everybody. Most of Banyen's podcasts and event series are free, and we welcome your donations to keep these programs accessible for all. Just go ahead and click on the PayPal link in the show description below. Also, for our live audience, towards the end of our conversation with Toko-pa today, we will be taking your questions. So go ahead and type those into the comments field on YouTube, and we'll tend to as many of those as we can. Toko-pa Turner is a Canadian author and internationally celebrated dream worker who blends the mystical tradition of Sufism with a Jungian approach to dreams. In 2001, she founded the Dream School and speaks internationally on the subject of dreams and belonging. Her first book, Belonging: Remembering Ourselves Home, is the winner of multiple awards, including the 2017 Gold Nautilus Award and the 2018 Reader's Favorite Gold Award. Today, Toko-pa Turner is with Banyen Books in conversation about her new book, The Dreaming Way: Courting the Wisdom of Dreams. You don't need an expert to tell you what your dreams mean. Understanding the language of dreams is as natural as grasping the moral of a story or finding beauty in art. In The Dreaming Way, Toko-pa revives an ancient yet radical idea that we must bring dreaming back to the people, to retrieve from the psychology rooted in rationalism our own dreaming authority. Through her unique blend of animism, Sufism, and Jungian psychology, Toko-pa introduces us to the friend who lives within, wisdom. When we learn to follow the dreaming way, we discover that it is calling us toward a unique purpose, pulling us into harmony with ourselves, each other, and the greater ecosystem. Her website is tokopa.com. Banyen community, a warm welcome to Toko-pa Turner.
Hi, Ross. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Toko-pa. It's so great to have you here. Really, really excited. And I know there's a lot of excitement in the Banyen community. Your first book, Belonging, of course, has been a huge success. And I know so many people that it's benefited. So yeah, thanks for being here.
When you did the intro, I saw the photographs of the interior of Banyen, and it brought me back to doing my first book release at the Banyen physical space. And we just had the place packed to the rafters, and it was just such an exciting, warm community. And I miss not being there in person with you, but I'm so glad that we get to do this.
Oh, wow. Yeah, those are beautiful evenings in Banyen. Yeah. At the start of chapter 2 in the book, you tell us that, quote, you always say a prayer to help us remember that our conversation takes place in a sacred context. what you're speaking about dream work. I'm wondering if you'd be able to lead us in just a little invocation or prayer to set the space today.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. Yeah, so when I'm doing dream work, I think, sometimes we'll get stuck in our heads and try to analyze a dream to try and get to the bottom of what it means. But I think really when we're doing dream work, we're in communion with something greater. And so I like to say a prayer that we acknowledge that sacred context, and we can do the same for this conversation here. So if you want to join me, just find a comfortable place where you're sitting and just notice where you are touching the earth, where your feet may be resting, where your sit bones are. And just you can close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you, and just take a couple of deep breaths to arrive in this space together. And we can just sort of acknowledge any of the stresses or anxieties or even excitements that the day, the week has been carrying in our bones and in our minds. Just acknowledge them and maybe even let something of that go.
Hmm.
And I like to always just begin with a bit of thanks, to offer a bit of gratitude to those holy, invisible forces that brought us here together today, or wherever you may be in time watching this video. And just to give thanks to those little inclinations of, hey, I want to click this link, or, I need to show up to this place in this moment. To just give thanks to those intuitions, those instincts, and even the dreams themselves, which provide us with these miraculous images, which are leading us somewhere meaningful. And so we give thanks to those holy, invisible forces for allowing us to cross paths in this moment. And my prayer is always that we are able in the time that we are together to listen with a special kind of attentiveness, not just to one another, but to that third something, that wisdom that is flowing beneath the surface of each of our lives, and which has an inclination towards life force, towards healing, towards wholeness, towards vitality. And so I ask that we have the humility and presence to listen for that something, for that wisdom, and that it benefits not only all of us who are present, but everyone we come into contact with, and perhaps even beyond, that it reaches into collective consciousness, touching that sparkle in everyone on earth. And if there's anything you want to add, Ross, please do.
I don't think I can add. That was just beautiful. Thank you, Toko-pa.
Good. You're welcome. Thanks to everyone who participated.
Now, we talked about your first book, Belonging, which was about just that. It was about belonging. I'm wondering, what is the relationship between dream work and belonging? And what's the connecting thread between these two books?
Yes, great question. Yeah, it really did feel like the dreaming way was the natural progression from belonging. In fact, I think many people might have argued that that would have been my first book, to write a book about dreams, because I have spent my life apprenticing myself to the study of dreams and to doing dream work with others, community. Um, but Belonging was the book that really wanted to come first. And I think that's because I had a question about my own sense of belonging or not belonging in the world that needed to be answered first. And what happened was, as I held this question of what is belonging? Where can I find belonging? Who has a sense of belonging around me? And what can they teach me about belonging? And as I began to ask these surrounding questions to that central question of what is belonging and how do we make it, um, just more questions started to proliferate from there. And I realized that there was so much to ask about. And as I asked those questions, dreams started to come to me. And these dreams were teaching me a very different way of looking at belonging than the one that I had been accustomed to understanding, and the one that most people, I think, are accustomed to thinking of belonging as something that is outside of ourselves, that if we diligently search for, that maybe in the course of our lives we will one day find this place of belonging where we are accepted for who we are, and our gifts will be recognized, and we will feel at home and as if we're bringing something valuable to the course of history and existence. But when I started talking to people, I discovered that I wasn't alone. Actually, very few people described feeling a sense of belonging. Even those people who appeared to me from the outside to look as if they had a nice little circle of belonging were also questioning their sense of belonging in the world. And these dreams that I was receiving were teaching me a very different perspective. And I'll just share one of those dreams with you here, just a brief version of it.
Okay.
Okay, so the dream was this, and I didn't write about it in that book actually, but it was really central to my shifting perspective on how to even define what belonging was. And the dream was this: somebody had been building a porch outside of their house. And they had left a hole in the porch where they wanted eventually, when all the construction was done, to take a tree and plunk it into the hole and have it live there. But of course, that makes no sense, right? Because a tree naturally grows. And so it was in the dream that the tree began to grow and it could no longer fit in this prescribed hole. And then the dream took on a surrealistic color, and the entire porch turned to cinders, and it blackened and it fell away into ash. And when I woke up from this dream, I understood that we need to reverse our idea of belonging, not as something that we, trying to fit in to something already existing, but that actually we have to grow it from the inside out. So, in the same way that my dreams were teaching me how to think about belonging, they teach all of us how to live in ourselves, how to live in the world, how to live with each other. And it's this inside out approach that I think creates an innate sense of belonging on our insides, which then becomes a kind of shelter that we can offer to others in the world, a place of belonging for others. So it's not something you get, it's something you give away. And so, I shared a lot of dreams in the book Belonging, dreams of the wonderful people that I have the privilege to work with every day in my private practice. Um, but there wasn't enough book to talk enough about dreams, and so naturally the progression of that was to focus as much as I could into the dreaming way, and so that's the long version of the story.
Wow, cool. And one of the things that you point out in the book is, I'll actually quote you here in the introduction. Excuse me. You say, "We moderns are unique in our dismissal of dreams. indigenous cultures around the world have historically valued dreams as fundamental to daily life. So I'm wondering if you can talk about what are the reasons that in our modern life that we've become dismissive of dreams, and what are we missing out on when we don't have them in their proper place in our lives?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think if I were to narrow it down to one thing, I would say it is rationalism itself that is the greatest and has been the greatest impediment to us having a relationship with the dreaming way. And so, this really, it started with Aristotle, but then certainly took hold in the 17th century around Rene Descartes and this idea that mind and body are separate things. And we began to treat reason as the only way to navigate reality. Everything, and that exists still today, that we don't believe or value anything unless it's been filtered through this frame of rationalism. And of course, there are great advancements that we have made as a civilization as a result of refining and strengthening our rationalism. But it has come at the expense of this other vast set of capabilities. And of course, that includes the dreaming, but it also includes the feeling life, the intuition, relationship to the unseen world, to wisdom and spirituality. And so, because we don't value these things, they are disappearing, they are becoming extinct. And we believe that, oh, I just don't remember my dreams. But I challenge you in this book to think about forgetting as a choice that you are making. Because when you forget your dreams, it is because you are not valuing them, because you are not giving space to them, because you are not recognizing the beauty and intelligence and wisdom that they can bring into your life. And it's not your fault. This is the culture we inherited. So we really have to begin from scratch to come back to, as the quote that you started off reading, which is something that indigenous cultures have always kept as cardinal to society, to tribal life, that of course we have to listen to what the dreams are saying, because they are part ecological information, part interconnected intelligence. They are part storytelling. There's so much contained within these dreams that can help, should be what we take our impetus from when we make decisions in the world, in the physical world, instead of taking our prompts and cues from the culture we have built, because that's sort of like a closed system. It's like a biofeedback loop where we're taking feedback from ourselves. It's an increasingly shallow kind of back and forth. But when we tap into our dreams, we're tapping into this ancient wellspring of interconnected wisdom, like in the case of the dream that I shared with you. This profound teaching came from that simple dream that shook me to my foundation and made me realize that I had been thinking, that many of us have been thinking about belonging in a completely backwards way. So, but this is just one small example of what can be learned from dreams. And of course, we have hundreds of examples of huge innovations that have come in music, in science, in technology, in art, that have all come out of dreams.
Yeah, you make it really clear that paying attention to our dreams, it's a lot more than just a self-indulgent activity. And I'm going to quote you again because I mean, this is such a beautifully written book. I just want to share this and then ask another question. You write, as our dreams nudge us in step with the larger intent of nature, we grow to see how necessary we are to these troubled times. Our shared future depends on each of us rekindling this connection between psyche and nature. Only when we learn to follow this broader wisdom can we meet with the social, psychological, and ecological challenges of our time. So, this is a really big question, but can you expand a little more on why our dreaming life matters in the context of the major challenges our world is currently facing?
It is a big question, and we're in a particular fraught era right now. And I think one of the things that we are seeing repeating in many different forms is divisiveness and projection and othering. And this is the result. This is just the result. But the root of why this is happening is because we are not having a relationship with our internal lives. Because when you do have a relationship with your dreams, not only are you given a mirror into your own shortcomings, you are given a mirror into your own potential and your unique purpose that is meant to fit in to the larger becoming of our civilization, of our species. And I know that's a grand thing to say, but this is how all of nature works. Nature works in this way. We are an ecosystem, and it isn't a metaphor. We are part of that ecosystem. And so when we dream, my belief is that nature is naturing through us in the form of these images. And why wouldn't it be? Because dreams are biological. It is a biological necessity that we have to have these dreams. And so when you begin to ask the question, well, why is this so? Why is the production of images and symbol and story necessary to us and as necessary as breathing or the circulation of blood or our heart beating? Well, that is a very interesting philosophical question. Why is the production of images necessary to us? And the only way to really answer this is to try to understand the language of images. And this is a language that in the book, I call it our mother tongue, because it transcends all cultures, all boundaries, all ages, and even species, which is something I get into a little bit. But we aren't the only ones who dream. And it's very interesting to consider, how different animals dream differently than humans do. But that's a bit tangential. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that nature is producing these images. And so I think it's actually very natural and instinctive for us to understand this language of images. But because we have learned to think only with that very left brain kind of thinking, which is so rationalistic, we have forgotten the language of images, the language of metaphor. But metaphor in and of itself is I think of it kind of like, do you know the term joinery? Like a Japanese joinery? Yes, I think of metaphor as a kind of, it's a joinery. It is helping to connect our two worlds, the imaginal world, the world of images, the world of symbols and of unseen things and wisdom, and the physical world that we are very familiar with. And metaphor, when you break down the word itself, actually means a bridge that carries over from one thing to the other. And so for me, this is the language that we need to relearn And it doesn't take a lot, but it does take something. We have to sort of suspend the habitual mind, which wants to make everything make sense in a rationalistic way. But thinking in metaphor requires a very different ability.
You also talk about the types of dreams in chapter 4. Just for our audience to know, this is such an in-depth look at dreams and dreaming. So we're only going to be able to touch on a small fraction of it today. But one of the things you touch on, Toko-pa, is the types of dreams. And by my count, I think you listed 14, but you say it's impossible to name every kind of dream. But knowing these universal types can help us deepen our discernment and mastery of dream work. Can you just talk a little bit about how we can discern types of dreams and how that helps us to interpret and work with them?
Yes, for sure. Well, our habit to categorize things, again, is a very rationalistic habit, but it can be helpful when you're starting out to think of different dreams in categories, because not all dreams are alike, and I think everyone has this experience. Some dreams tend to replay the events of the day before. That doesn't make them insignificant dreams, but then you might also have one of those really big dreams that are, leave you sort of shaking for a few days because they have such an emotional impact on you and you aren't quite sure how to process them all at once. So we can see just in that example that we have this spectrum of potency within the kind of dreaming that we do. But some of the types that I mention in that chapter are, for instance, in Jungian terms, we would say compensatory dreams are those kinds of dreams that try to compensate for a misguided attitude that we have in waking life. So when we're just thinking in a very narrow perspective of, I'm right about this thing, the dream might try to compensate that one-sided attitude by providing something very opposite to help us lean a little bit more towards the center. So the image that I use is like walking on a tightrope, that dreaming and working with our dreams is like constantly adjusting our balance from left to right, trying to maintain balance. And often we'll fall right off that wire. But ultimately, when you pay attention to your dreams, it helps to kind of regulate one-sided attitudes. So this would be a compensatory dream. And then there might be something like a precognitive dream, where you have a dream about something that happens, and then a couple of days later, that same thing happens in the world. That's a precognitive dream, being able to know something before it happens. And these dreams are incredibly remarkable because they cause you to question the nature of time itself. Clearly, time is not as linear as we think if we can dream something before it happens. So that's another kind of dream. What would be another
What about
one?
the paranormal dreams? I was very interested in that, the paranormal dreams.
Yeah, so paranormal is, a huge term, and you could probably write several volumes of books about different paranormal dreams. But I just want to say, what is paranormal versus normal?
Right.
That is a question I propose in the beginning of that section, because there's not really any such thing as a normal dream. But what we categorize as paranormal dreams could be something like, was there one in particular that you were drawn to?
Well, for me, I've had many experiences. I'm quite sensitive when there are what people might call entities or other psychic beings of some sort in the space, and I often notice when they're influencing my dreams. And you
Yeah.
do get into that, so I'm curious about that topic.
Yeah. So, what some people call entities, another person might call energies. It doesn't really matter what your language is, but it's the idea that there are unseen forces that are in your midst. And if you're sensitive, which, for instance, children really are often picking up in the background information of their environment, and it will give them disturbing dreams. And so, certainly, that is the amazing thing about dreams is that they give form to the unseen forces in life. So that could look like energies in your space or unresolved disagreements that are unspoken with others. They might also look like your own unrecognized emotions that you haven't been able to articulate yet, which are stirring within you. And then the dream does you a favor by showing them in a form so that you can see them outside of yourself and begin to um, understand them and their dimensionality. So, certainly, that would be a form of paranormal dreaming. I've had dreams where I had a dream once. I tell this story in the book where I dreamt that there were interlopers on my building. Like I lived downtown in Toronto at the time, and I dreamt that there were intruders in the building. And I woke up with a start because it was very scary in the dream. I think they had weapons in the dream, and so I was in bed with my partner at the time, and I was just telling them about the dream. And about 10 minutes later, we heard footsteps on the stairs outside. And because we were awake, we had the presence of mind to close the window to the loft and move the ladder so nobody could access the space and call the police. And they arrested two men on the roof who had weapons. So a dream like that is, I mean, I still am incredibly stunned by that dream because, I mean, I suppose you could call it precognitive, but it also felt like a helping hand, of something dangerous could happen here. And I am going to help you avert it, which it did.
Wow, that's amazing. My dream wasn't as potent as that, but one time I had a similar situation where I dreamt about a coyote, and then I woke up and I went and looked out my window, and there's a coyote outside in the backyard. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah,
I bet you had a powerful relationship with that animal ever since.
yeah, yeah. They've shown up for me in different ways quite a few times.
Hmm, amazing.
Courting the dream. Chapter 9, you talk about this process of courting the dream, and Martin Prechtel is a friend of Banyen. We've had him on quite a few times, and I was delighted to hear the story you told him about him in the opening of chapter 9, where he said you were sitting in ceremony with him and a group, and he said courtship is to sit next to someone and discover what they love. And then you tell us that this shifted your perception regarding your own work with dreams. Can you tell us about that and what it means to court a dream?
Yes, I love Martine so much. What a blessing he is. And for any of our listeners who don't know of Martine's work, his last name is Prechtel, Prechtl. Definitely look up his wonderful books and enjoy. um, but so yes, I remember that day, and it was like he had put into words how I naturally was approaching my dreams in that way. And so I decided to borrow that same language to describe my process with working with dreams. So, most of the way that we're typically taught to think of working with our dreams is through that sort of rationalistic perspective, certainly from a psychological one, where we try to analyze the dream to figure out what it means for us and to gain something from it, like an insight or guidance or this kind of thing. Um, there's an amazing rainbow in the sky right now. I
No
just had
way.
to
Oh,
point
wow.
that out. Wow. Prismatic.
Lucky.
Um, so, um, so I like to reverse that approach completely, which is that we're not trying to get something from our dreams. We're actually trying to discover what the dream wants and what the dream is longing for, and then attempt instead to move our lives in such a way as to fulfill that longing. And so I developed this. After decades of working with dreams, I thought there were really these essential core keys that if we could inhabit these perspectives, any dream will flower itself open to us. And so that's what I offer in this chapter is this what I call a 5 key method. So again, it's not a linear method, it's not a step-by-step listicle. It's more like these are core principles that if you can inhabit will open up any dream. And they're very simple, they're deceptively simple, but they're actually really hard to embody because they go against that way that I've been referring to as rationalistic, which is this I want to pick it apart, I want to analyze it, I want to figure it out. It requires a lot of holding presence, being curious, listening attentively, reflecting back either to another person or in a reflective process on what has come out of a process of curiosity, of asking artful questions of the dream, and then synthesizing all of that into an action of some kind or a ritual of some kind, which is a really important part of dream work. And so it's quite a large chapter in the book because I go into each key in a fair bit of depth, and then I use example dreams to show you how we can move through dreams in that way, in the hopes that it can empower people in their families, in their relationships, in communities to use those tools, which are simple, and to practice them together. But here's the amazing thing these tools, which dreams have taught me that they like, and which causes them to trust me enough to open themselves to me, are really keys for living life well. They're keys to having harmonious relationships. They are the keys for creating peace and understanding with each other. So, I really think that the practicing of dream work has this mutual benefit, not only of giving us insight into our particular gifts and our shortcomings and our shadow pieces, but also that something is being refined in us through the work to strengthen our character in such a way that we can build better families, better relationships, better communities, a better society.
Wonderful. I just want to remind our live audience we're going to get to some of your questions for Toko-pa in about 5 minutes or so. So keep them rolling in the comments field on YouTube. You talked back to the start of our conversation. You did mention that a lot of people talk about either forgetting their dreams, or so I know some people that say, "Oh, I don't even dream." And this is something you get into in chapter 8, forgetting and remembering. And I'm wondering if dreaming is accessible to all of us all the time. You talk about certain ways that we can nurture it or make it more accessible. What are the conditions that you found are ideal for us to not only be aware that we're dreaming, but to be able to remember our dreams?
Mhm. Yes, I think, it's most important that we value the imagination. And so I spend I think it's chapter 2, early in the book, a huge chunk of time discussing the imagination, and the imaginal world, because this is a sacred space that certainly we access when we're dreaming, but also can be accessed anytime we aren't filling up our eyes and our minds and our attention with external stimulus. And so reclaiming imaginal space is, I think, perhaps the most urgent action we need to take on Earth, especially now as our lives are growing dominated by social media, especially, and the curated algorithms of various invisible powers that have their own agenda for what they want us to think and see. And so I think one of the most revolutionary acts that we can do is to reclaim that imaginal space. Of course, there are some very simple tools for remembering your dreams. And I can briefly touch on some of those here. And of course, I go into much more detail in the book. But I think there's an even bigger conversation to be had here about allowing ourselves that spaciousness in our everyday lives. You can call it gap time, you can call it daydreaming, you can call it imagination, whatever language you use. It is those spaces where instead of filling our attention with different kinds of distractions, that we allow the mind to wander where it goes, because this is the creative energy at work. And so, certainly, remembering your dreams is an important start. We do, all of us dream. People who say that they don't dream, they're just not remembering their dreams. And it's normal to have ebbs and flows in your dreaming cycle. So I don't mean to suggest that you should be hard on yourself if you're going through a phase of not remembering, because that happens to everyone, especially when we're busy and we have a lot of things to do in waking life. We can our attention can drift into the external world instead of the internal one. But it's important to pull your attention back periodically and put out your elbows and make a little bit of elbow room for intentionally remembering your dreams. So dreams love to be written down almost more than anything. They love to be written down, and there's no way around that. You can even do voice recordings, and that certainly helps. But even after you've voice recorded it, I suggest writing them down so that you can visually reference your dreams and see the words written. So that's a habit I recommend everybody get into. And one of the big pieces that people always skip over is not to dismiss fragment dreams. Because even if you have a single image and you think, oh, it's not a magical dream, it's not a narrative dream, it's not an interesting dream, that's the rational mind talking that is trying to dismiss dreaming as nonsense. And so you have to, move past that dismissal and just write it down. And even if it's a fragment, it's sort of like pouring water on a garden. You give some reverence to that one small fragment, and the next time you'll have a greater dream and a greater dream. And soon you'll be coming to me and saying, I have too many dreams. I don't know what to do with all these dreams. And to those of you who have that problem, I always say it's okay to let some of the smaller fish go. You don't have to write all of the dreams. If you just pick even one dream a week, 2 dreams a week, that would be amazing, and it will enrich your life to no end. So, and then, as a habit, I think it's really important to have boundaries around computers, devices, televisions, anything that is outsourcing your imagination for you, because that is literally what's happening. It's an outsourced imagination, and it can tend to create patterns of thought that aren't necessarily native to your own way of thinking. So we have to combat that by creating space.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. We've got some really nice questions coming in here. Is it okay if we tend to some of those?
Yeah, I'd love to hear some questions.
Okay, great. Here's someone that doesn't sound like they're having a problem with dream remembering or having enough dreams. Sahiba says, I dream multiple dreams every night and remember them after, and it becomes quite overwhelming and heavy in the morning. Sitting with them daily feels like a big task.
Mm.
Any advice? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's wonderful, first of all, because there are so many people who have the opposite problem, where they can't remember a single dream, and it can break your heart not to remember your dreams, especially if you've had a taste of how meaningful they are. But Sahiba, you're in a place where you need a little bit of help. I think it's possible that. You don't need to write down all those dreams, especially if you're having many in a night. In fact, I would recommend that you give yourself a break. If you work with one dream in depth over the course of 3 or 4 days or even a week, that's going to be way more impactful than trying to tend to all of the pieces all at once and not giving any of those pieces devoted attention, because you can't possibly. So again, the image of a garden comes to mind. It's like if you just weed that one little corner of the garden, something really special can flourish there. So what I would recommend for you is just to pick one dream a week. Two, if you're feeling hungry for more, and let some of the other ones go, and really use your tools, whatever tools you have right now. And certainly, I provide a lot of practical tools in the book if you want to pick it up or if you've been reading it, to go deeper into that one dream. And another thing you can do is actually ask your dream maker to give you a break. You can actually say a prayer before bedtime and say, beloved dreams, can you please be more succinct with me? Can you give me a simple dream that won't overwhelm me, that I can just tend to? And you'll be surprised how receptive your dreams are to having compromise with you. And the only thing is, you have to be then you have to make sure not to dismiss it for being too small a dream, because that's the temptation on the other side. If you're, especially if you're used to really vibrant, images with lots of scenes and lots of characters. So yeah, try to narrow it down and just focus on that little corner of the garden to see what will grow in that place. And don't worry about losing other dreams, because anything that has roots will come back.
Great. Thank you. And thanks, Sahiba, for that question. There's one here from Sarah who says, sometimes I dream of other people's trauma. Is there a good place to start to learn about telepathic dreaming?
Yeah. So the question that comes up for me when I hear this is, how do you know? How do you know that it's someone else's trauma and not something that's resonating with your own? And that's a very tricky question, between what belongs to someone else and what belongs to you. Certainly, we are telepathic people, and it's natural for us to share in empathy and compassion with especially the people around us and things that are impacting us in the world. However, since your dreams are giving you those particular images, and not perhaps any other images, I would suggest that there is a connection with you personally that is meaningful between what you might consider somebody else's trauma and your own psyche's experience of life. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. I work with dreamers all the time. And it so often happens to me that when I'm working with another individual, I will have matches with them about some aspect of my own life that I'm particularly working on, that maybe I'm just a few steps ahead and able to provide guidance to them. And I don't know what this magic is. It's the interconnected magic of the ecosystem that brought us together in this magical way to be able to share in this thing. I have a friend who used to say, God heals in twos. God heals in twos. And I love that, because I think if you are having a match with somebody around a certain trauma, there's an opportunity for you both, an opportunity and also a hurdle for you both to heal something together.
Thank you. And thanks, Sarah, for the question. There's another one here from Sarvan who says, any advice on disturbing recurring dreams? How do I attend to them compassionately? Sometimes they affect my whole day.
Of course. Yeah. So recurring dreams are so fascinating, because a recurring dream is really like being stuck in a loop. I mean, that seems kind of obvious when I say it out loud, but a loop of behavior response. So what I mean by that is maybe there's something in your environment that triggers a response from you, and you have a habitual response which results in a recurring outcome in life. So this is when you have recurring dreams. Unless, of course, you're talking about PTSD, which is a different thing. When complex trauma has happened to an individual, often the trauma will repeat, not to torture you, but because it's attempting, I think, to come out of a splintered state into a state of integration. And if that is the case, then you will need a mental health professional to support you in trying to integrate some of the images of the trauma that happened to you. But having recurring dreams is incredibly normal. Most of us at some point in our lives have had recurring dreams. And so the question becomes, what is it that is triggering the dream? Now, this is key, because you want to be able to discover, this is your mission, to discover what it was in your environment the day before or a couple days previous that brought the dream on. There's almost always a triggering event, and the tricky part is being able to find it, because it could be something unnoticeable. It could be something you're used to dismissing or ignoring. It could be something internal, not necessarily an external event where you speak to yourself in a certain way, or you get caught in a certain way of treating yourself, or feeling bad, or feeling afraid. So you would treat a recurring dream just as you would treat any other dream, where you want to write it down in as much detail as possible. Because even though we think of recurring dreams as all the same, in fact, every single recurring dream is slightly different from the one before. And it's those minute details, dream to dream, that are important, because they're showing you how your perspective or attitude is evolving in relation to the issue at hand. So, to recap, you want to discover First of all, what is triggering the dream? That is going to help you understand what the core issue is that's bringing on the dream. You want to notice what are the evolving details of the dream, because this will show you how you're adapting to that. We'll call it a threat. As I say, it could be an internal threat, it could be an external threat, we don't know. And then finally, I would say the most important thing is to discover what is the strongest feeling in this recurring dream. And it may be easy to just say, well, I feel fear, I'm frightened of this thing. But I want you to pursue it a little more depthfully and ask yourself at a more subtle level, what is the fear like? What is the quality of that fear? How can you name it? How can you articulate it? And then you can say to yourself, and what is my response? So for instance, let's say you have an intruder coming into your house and it is terrifying and you feel like you're trying to keep them out and you are trying to put furniture in front of the door or nail it shut or close the locks. Well, here we could say that the fear, yes, fear of something intruding upon your peace. Maybe that's how you articulate your fear. Well, your strategy to deal with that fear is to block it out, to lock it out. Well, that says a lot. Let's say the dream results in, well, they break through the locks anyway, and then I wake up from the dream. So you want to try coming up with a different strategy. And though this may sound really scary, you might consider looking out the peephole to see who is really there. Or you might consider even inviting them in and asking them, what do they want? Who are you? And this would be a radically different approach in the dream that will certainly change the outcome of things. So there's lots to get into here, but hopefully some of those things have made you curious and just to notice this pattern of threat, strategy, outcome. And what you want is a different outcome for the dream, right? So if you can understand what the threat is, that can help you discover, well, what strategy would I like to try with regards to that threat? And you could practice a different strategy in your dream if you're lucid enough to do so. But you could also practice a different strategy in waking life if you can identify what the threat is in the first place. So that's the mission ahead of you. I hope something in there helped.
Well, that was a very comprehensive answer. Wonderful. Thank you. And thanks for that question, Sarvin, and everybody else who submitted questions. I always wish we had more time to get to everybody's questions. Excuse me. I just wanted to share with you, Toko-pa, there's a comment here from someone whose YouTube handle is Wayward Life Sailing. And they said, I just wanted to let you know I have Belonging next to my bed, and it has become somewhat of a holy book to me. The way that people look to religious texts for guidance, Belonging has given me that. And there's a nice little heart.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. That book is really a labor. Well, they both are, labors of my heart, and they were holy for me to write. And so that continues to be conveyed with you in relationship with the book is really meaningful for me. Thank you for sharing that. I hope you love this one as much as that one.
I love this book. Folks, we've been having the privilege of speaking with Toko-pa Turner about her newest book, The Dreaming Way, Courting the Wisdom of Dreams. This is one of my favorite topics, and this is by far the most in-depth and integrative book I've read on dreaming. I'm very grateful for it. Thank you so much, Toko-pa, for joining us today and sharing your insight and wisdom.
Thank you so much for all your gorgeous questions and for holding our space so beautifully and also for reading the book with such care. I really appreciate that. It's been a joy to be here. And thanks to everyone who came today. Thanks for showing up.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele, and I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.